I invite you again to this second lecture, and I hope you enjoyed the last lecture and you are able to read additional materials, inclusive the materials that have been provided in Moodle, but also to have your own discussions and to do your own critical thinking about development, the concepts and theories of development. In this lecture, I'm going to focus on themes of social development, globalization and human development. And I would like you to pay special attention to the term or the concept or the word globalization. However, before I go far, I want to bring one thing into mind. And I have given you the book on the South Center. This book was written by, under the leadership, and most of it by Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. And he was appointed as chairman of the Global Center, created by United Nations and supported by a number of countries, based in Geneva, Switzerland, to do research and to develop a report on how to address the problem of poverty and human development in the global scale. Because there were enough resources in the world to eradicate global poverty. But the poverty was still persistent, it was not reducing, and inequalities were a problem, and they were a source of conflict and underdevelopment, death and misery and diseases. And of course, if one part of the world is under the threat of disease and epidemics, then the whole world is under threat of disease and epidemics. And therefore, it was the collective interest to redefine development and try to look for new ways where there will be a push. Like in Europe, when Europe, after the First and the Second World War, there was poverty and underdevelopment because of the war. But then there was a plan, an international plan, very much at the time that the United Nations was being created, and it was coordinated within that framework to actually be able to give Europe a push so that it can come out of poverty and development because of the war, and the infrastructure was built. And of course, by the time Mwalimu Nyerere was in the South Commission, Europe had completely recovered. It went through economic recovery back into post-development society, industrial society, most of it, particularly in the western part. So we need to ask ourselves, what is the story in Africa when there was so much international development aid coming to Africa in the 60s and 70s and 80s? These were now the 90s. Why is there no significant translation into human development? And what the South Center particularly said in the report, if you pick one thing from the report, it actually said development is about people. That development is human-centered. Development is not about things. It's not about material things, but it is about human development. So, Mwalimu Nyerere and others in the South Commission emphasized that development should be human-centered. It's not about things. It's not about infrastructure or about particularly indicators, but it is about people. Development should be human-centered. Most indicators for measuring development were based on production, or rather utilities. Utilities means is a quantity to measure satisfaction from consumption. So if you say you are very satisfied with the water service, then we can count those as 5 utilities. If you are saying you are neither satisfied nor unsatisfied, then we can count that as 3. If you say you are very unsatisfied, we can count that as 1. So economists in the beginning started to measure development by utilities, by the way they consumed different commodities and the level of satisfaction. We are going to see, of course, the present trend is focusing on satisfaction, but the utility theory was focusing on not just satisfaction, but satisfaction of almost anything. So people can be satisfied from different things, even when those things do not contribute to human development. For example, a very good example are the pastoralists of Tanzania, who may have several heads of cattle, and they are satisfied by just looking and counting the number of cattle. But if you look at human development indicators in terms of education of the household, food, human rights of women and children, quality of life, low, but level of satisfaction, high with cattle. So there is a mismatch between the number of utilities you derive from services and the number of satisfaction. And of course, development has and continues to be measured by GDP, gross domestic product. And this is counting the different services and valuing the different value of products which are produced in the economy, and then putting a number, putting a quantity behind each of them, and coming up with a certain gross domestic product. And of course, people were happy that GDP has grown, GDP has remained constant, GDP has been increasing, when there are several issues that are problematic about GDP. First of all, GDP, its composition is very important. When you decompose the GDP, gross domestic product, you may find that it is focusing growth on only a few areas, which do not provide employment or income or support the consumption of the majority of the population. So I think there is someone who said there is one person in the world who has enough money than, I think if you put 5 people together or 10 people together in the world, those people have more income than a third of the global population put together. That is inequality. So you may say that the weakness of GDP is growing, but that growth is only shared by a handful of people. So people, in terms of production or in terms of income, but also in terms of services. Services may be counted in the GDP, but the services are only consumed by a certain amount of people who are very few. Because you also have inequality when it comes to consumption of services because of barriers. Let us take an example, banking. What is the contribution of services in the banking sector in the economy or in the GDP? But then how many people access services in the banking sector? You find that there is a mismatch. If, for example, hypothetically, only 30% of the people access services in the banking sector, it means that 70% are out. That number of GDP, we get a number, but it does not reflect the 70% of the majority of the population. So GDP became problematic, and in many countries, particularly in developing countries, they started to report high levels of GDP growth. For example, in the case of Tanzania, growth has been 7.1, 6.9, sometimes 6.5. Say the average of 7 for the past 15 years. An impressive number. And even when you look at household level, household poverty has been declining. An impressive number. But levels of inequality are high. And the word GDP, the word to watch there is a concept. And theory of development is the word gross. Because gross means total. So you add the number of individual incomes, and then you divide by the number of those people, and you get an average number. It's GDP. So you can report that at least every Tanzanian is getting $300 plus a year. That is an average number. There are some who are making more and some who are making less. As a result, the word gross, though it is an indicator of development, it might be misleading. If you look at the economy of Tanzania, for example, the main drivers of GDP are mining, telecommunications, construction, tourism, but these sectors do not employ a broad spectrum of the population. They don't employ the majority of the population. The majority of the population in Tanzania, 80%, their main economic activity is agriculture. They do not contribute to youth employment. A contractor of a road, obviously there's a bit of work generated, but most of it is capital intensive, using machinery. But the large amount of transfers of income to that particular sector that accounted as a contribution to GDP, they go to the individual construction company and their shareholders. And these are private companies, so you find the shareholder is probably one family, and one family that lives abroad. So this is the critical thinking that has gone to GDP, and you can see it's over-reliance. There's an over-reliance in terms of reporting and discussion and assumptions and projections based on the GDP, whereas that word gross can be misleading. And therefore, in terms of analysis, some people came up with the word net national income. So you have GDP or gross national income, but to have the word net, because that one, net, is trying to divide to get the amount of each individual member of that particular country. But then, as you know, when you get into that particular country, when you get the net amount, that amount again is not representative because it comes from the gross. So the gross is the total number, the net is dividing the total number by the population as the denominator. And therefore, we just get, say, everybody gets $300 plus. The truth is, you find many people who say, I don't get $300 plus. This number does not represent me because of inequalities. And therefore, when in the South Commission they were confronted by the analysis by the World Bank and IMF and other leading centers that were looking at gross domestic product, net income in the national income, they said no. Development is not about these numbers and about these measurements. Development is about people. So at that time, a number of scholars started to come up, and one of them was Professor Amartya Sen. And his book on freedom as development is provided and is uploaded in the Moodle as a reading material. But Professor Sen came up with a very radical view, and he said that development is not what we think and we call development, or what we think is development. It's not about the utilities, the consumption. It's not about the income, but it's about freedom. And hence his book, Freedom as Development. What does Professor Sen mean when he says freedom? He introduces the concept of capabilities, human capabilities, human capability development. That means capabilities is the ability of a person to be or a person to function in order to achieve certain desired ends. So, if I want to get from place A to place B, if I want to get from Dar es Salaam to Addis Ababa, or to New York, or to London, or to Hong Kong, I am supposed to have the capability to go there. The capability to function in ways of moving from one place to another. And therefore, he measured that, he argued that development should be measured by the capabilities to function in different ways. So people are limited. They are limited to function in different ways. Maybe they can go from Dar es Salaam to Nairobi, or from Dar es Salaam to Addis Ababa. They cannot go to London. They cannot go to New York. Therefore, they have the capability to go from Dar es Salaam to Nairobi, but their capability deprived to go to London and New York. Hence, the concept of capability deprivation. What does this mean in development? That means households have capabilities to do certain things, basic things. Some of them do not have the capability to get 1 meal a day. And why can't they have the capability? There are some internal reasons and external reasons which make them not to be able to get 1 meal a day. Some can get a meal but they are not able to get clothing, to get health services, to send their children to school, or to send their children to school from primary to secondary to tertiary to high level. Therefore, their capability. There is what Professor said in the book that if you read, he calls the space of capabilities. That space is small for some people and it is big for some people. People are capability deprived. So what is development? What should development do? Development, according to Professor said, should not be about counting the rate of GDP or the rate of net national income, but should be about enlarging their capabilities so that the people can increase their ability to function. If they can't function to go from Dar es Salaam to Nairobi, then they can now function to go to Dar es Salaam, Nairobi. If they can't function to go from Dar es Salaam to Addis Ababa, now they can function. Their ability to function in different ways in order to reach their desired ends. And therefore, development, according to Professor said, is about enlarging opportunities. For example, if the barrier of households to grow vanilla crop variety, for example, is they do not have income to buy pesticides, to buy the seedlings, to take time from competing activities in order to do the weeding and cultivation. If they are provided with microcredit, then according to SEN, they can get the microcredit and overcome the income barrier. The barrier that was limiting them to function in ways that can enable them to grow vanilla. And now, because of that, they are enlarging their opportunities. Because now they are able to get pesticides, they are able to spend time on the farm, they are able to get the improved variety of seedlings, they are able to rest, and by resting, it means they can network, they can dialogue, they can integrate with other actors to access markets, to access information. And as a result, they are able to function in ways that they could not function before. And therefore, you can say their capabilities have enlarged. And therefore, he came for the first time with a qualitatively very different measure of development. That development is about freedom. The freedom to enlarge opportunities. The freedom to function in different ways, which households could not function before. And the freedom to achieve desired ends because of increased capabilities. And the work of Amartya Sen has informed a wide range of programs and policies. And one of them is, of course, the cash transfers and the social protection. How can people be given safety nets so that they will not go into absolute poverty, but using those safety nets to enable them to function, to be transformative. How do you become transformative? By getting social protection or social safety net is that the income that you get, normally given as cash transfers, one is able to invest, use that income to invest in income-generating activities. And as you invest in income-generating activities, you are able to enlarge your opportunities. to come out of an absolute poor household that depends on the cash transfer, to stand on your own feet and to integrate into the market economy. And the market economy has got huge opportunities. So there are several things you can think about your own experience: a phone, a bank account, access to internet. All these have contributed to enlarging opportunities, has contributed to freedom, and therefore it became a very important departure point when it comes to analyzing development. Different organizations in the world, but led by the United Nations Development Program, also came with what was importantly known as the Human Development Index, or the Human Development Paradigm, or just human development. That development is about being people-centered. It's not about numbers, but it's about people, and should be measured by the rate of development of people. So UNDP came with the Human Development Index, and it was looking at what do households consume. And this was a composite index, that it was an index that measured the different things that households consume as a proxy. That a proxy means something which points to something else. That if households are able to consume these things, then that tells us that these households also consume other things, and therefore they are developing. And so the Human Development Index came at measuring basically four things. One is income. What is the level of income of a household? And another one is water. And of course, access to drinking water, access to sanitation. As you know, the household budget survey, at least for Tanzania and most other countries, are measuring the access to water among households, the distance to water, the type of toilet. This is an important definition and indicator into looking at the human development rate and situation in the country. And then food, access to food, the number of meals, the number of calorific intakes that a particular household acquires. And this became important measurements of the Human Development Index. And of course, the debate was, should health services be included? But access to water was treated as a proxy of health of the household. Because if households get water, then they will tend to be healthy. But of course, you may want to look at other health indicators. But as far as the Human Development Index, looking at income, looking at water and sanitation, looking at food, but also looking at education, reading and writing. The number of households who are able to read and write became a basic definition. And all these things were widely debated. Why do you want to include in the Human Development Index the number of households that know how to read and write? Because when a person knows how to read and write, their capabilities are drastically enlarged, because they engage in lifelong learning. In life, there is learning. Learning happens all the time. It does not happen in formal institutions. When you get a new seed, it comes with instructions. When you get a new medication for your child, it comes with instruction. So ability to read and write and count is a big indicator to tell us about the level of development of that individual or of that household or of that nation or of the world. And therefore, that one became. It's now called the 3 R's, arithmetic, reading, and writing. And that was included. But the Human Development Index was further enlarged with the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. There are several indicators. Expanding on these 4 indicators were included in the Sustainable Development Goals, which will now have Sustainable Development Goals. And I encourage you as part of this course to familiarize yourself with Sustainable Development Goals as the overarching framework for the way international development is now being defined. And most recent, but also in the Sustainable Development Goals, there is inclusion of an index, a new index called the State of Happiness Index, that development should be measured by the level of satisfaction among households with their life, with their quality of life, with the services they are getting, and this has been included in the Sustainable Development Goal, and it is part of a new emerging discipline in economics called transdisciplinary economics. This is very new, but it is moving towards that direction, measuring development in terms of satisfaction. So when you do a project, for example, when you do a water project, you want to measure how are people satisfied. Has that project made people happy? Because development, a good development policy or plan or project is that which makes people better off and not worse off as they were before. And therefore, that is now a measure to try to see how people are happy. And not only how people are happy with their project, with their plan, with their policy, but with their government. And therefore, referendums, opinion polls, and for Tanzania opinion polls, there's been a ban on doing opinion polls on the leadership, because it is important to understand that the happiness of people is an indicator that development is human-centered. And I think that is the debate which you can further in the class, and I look forward in the work ahead for you to have further discussion about that. Now, let me end up with the concept of globalization. I've mentioned briefly globalization in lecture 1, and the focus now is looking at globalization as a concept of development, but how globalization contributes to human development. And as we said, human development is human-centered. As you remember, I said in lecture 1 that Marx and others at their time predicted that capital has a tendency to be transboundary, to go beyond the boundary of the primary state, the political state, and it starts to penetrate into the boundaries of other states, because the markets do not have boundaries. Markets are what to say, permeous. They permeate the political boundaries. They grow, they look for capital, they look for markets, They look for finance, they look for skills, they do not know boundaries. They look for them from where they exist. And the political boundaries would always try to come in between and try to put their blockages. Now, globalization is the new concept we are putting forward into this class to replace the analysis on imperialism because of the limitations, one, but because the concept has been used differently by different people, and it may mean different meanings depending on who you are reading, and so we prefer to use the word globalization because in this class, because it reflects the current international development from a development studies perspective better than looking at imperialism. The concept of globalization is advanced. First of all, it's a relatively new concept. It has been here maybe for just 15 years, basically, at most 20, but developing much more from very limited use and application to now a very common application and understanding, and as the way it permeates and the way it affects different disciplines, from economics to political science to science and technology to trade to marketing. It can be applied to medicine. It can be applied across the board. Globalization is about integration of markets, integration of economies beyond political space. And it has been made possible by a number of revolutions that have happened that did not exist before. That the importance of boundaries have been diminished, because in the past, for under the market system, you needed licensing and regulations in order to perform businesses. Hence, the chartered companies. You had a chartered company, it had to be given a charter or a license by parliament, or a license by government, or a license by special appointment to a royal charter. But the market, through a series of revolutions, it became much more easy for the market to integrate into different economies, into different countries, such that the political licensing and regulation became less important. First of all, capital was moving across the world. You can now buy shares. You can list for shares in London, New York, Paris, Hong Kong from your mobile phone. And through internet, maybe based very remote areas. You can provide services on social media and on the internet without necessarily being present physically in one jurisdiction or the other. And therefore, globalization became a very important element when it comes to market sharing, market working, etc. Integration into the other economies, and this has been made possible with a number of revolutions: the transport revolution, the internet or communication revolution, the financial services revolution, the global marketplace revolutions, all these have contributed to make the world as a village. The world is no longer far away. You can make transactions, both physical and financial, and in terms of buying and selling or transactions or contracts very quickly and rapidly across the world, made most possible, of course, with the communication and the financial, that really the sanctioning of political national authorities has become unnecessary, because people can meet in what is called cyberspace. They can meet in cyberspace and conclude their transactions very quickly. You know very well, you can now buy your car from Japan by just from your phone or from your laptop. You can look at it and somebody pops up, this whole space called e-commerce, and you see your car. You can zoom in and look inside, outside, up, down, and book for it right there when it is in the auction. You can bid internationally from the auction, and you purchase it, and you can transfer your money right there on your phone, on your laptop, and the car begins to be shipped to where you are. It's a tremendous development that the authorities, the national political authorities, cannot talk about licensing, because they cannot move as fast as the market, information in the market is moving. And therefore, the demand side, that means buyers and sellers, were moving fast, that the importance of boundaries no longer became functional. You can try to impose, but in reality, practice on the ground, they didn't become important, because people were already ahead and they were already doing international trade ahead of national boundaries, and therefore it became important. But beyond the cyberspace and the individual, even companies had become global multinational companies. Companies in the time of the world wars belonged to their countries. You had a company for a particular country, and it may be having agents across in different markets. That was a later stage. Or sometimes if you wanted to buy a Volkswagen, you had to travel to Germany to buy a Volkswagen from the Volkswagen factory. But slowly they expanded. And this is the behavior of capital. They expanded. They started by having companies in the other countries as agents, and then later they began opening their own branches, and therefore they became global multinational companies like Shell, like British Petroleum, like Coca-Cola, like Vodafone. They are all over the world. They are a global multinational company. Others became as what is called global value chains. Global value chains. The companies may be in one market, but they depend on the companies from other markets. For example, just an example, a very practical example is cashew nuts. The companies are in Vietnam and India, but they are depending on the cashew nuts from Tanzania. Cocoa, the companies are in Switzerland and France, but they depend on cocoa from Africa, Ivory Coast, and other countries around there, of course. cocoa is also grown in Tanzania. And they become a multinational, but different companies depending on each other in a global value chain. And that was the beginning of globalization. Now, globalization, as I said in the first lecture, economic interests tend to generate political arrangements to protect them. And therefore, it started becoming important for countries which are dominating certain global value chain or certain global multinationals or certain global transactions, as I have explained above, wanting to protect them. And therefore, they would also have global military presence. A global military presence. In some places, it has been referred to as the military-industrial complex. That's why you hear of the American Navy in Middle East, in the Pacific. It is all over the world. That is why you hear of increasing cooperation of different countries working together, say in the Indian Ocean, trying to fight piracy so as to protect trade routes, because the global multinational companies, the global value chains, the global transactions that are happening by individuals, companies, and people, supply and demand, they depend on these communication routes in order to sustain the global economy. And the global economy as a whole depends on the successful communication, successful operation of the global market. So it's no longer an issue of a successful market policy for individual country, but a successful market policy for the entire globe, with global watchdogs like the IMF and the World Bank and other actors. But you hear even people like the G20, the G7, group of 7 most industrialized countries, leading economies, group of 10, they are meeting to coordinate the healthy global market index, global market, so that it approximates as much as possible a perfect market. Of course, this is under tremendous pressure. As you know, there is ongoing trade war between the US and China, very much outside the framework of the World Trade Organization. But even the World Trade Organization was established in order to look at this perfect, near perfect as possible market, a global market, which allows a free good of flow of goods and services, free flow of information, free entry and exit of actors in the marketplace, free transaction, perfect allocation of resources. You can read about what a perfect market is and what distortions are. So we come back to a different analysis of global economy, not very different from what Marx had said in a different time with different language. Globalization results into conflict. It results into anarchy. And that's why you hear a country being interested on their security interests, saying its security interests are linked to a country that is not sharing borders, that is far from them. And this is the concept of a strategic neighborhood. A strategic neighborhood is that neighborhood which your economy depends on your security, but security in this case, economy, depends from. So if you depend for oil from the Middle East, and that oil may be cut off, and without oil, your economy will fall, and therefore it is your security interest to ensure that you have an access to that commodity to feed your industries. And therefore, because of that security concern, everyone is there, engaged in the political and the domestic affairs and the dynamics of that region in order to protect their own economic and domestic affairs and the dynamics of their own region. And therefore, even in terms of security, there is globalization. Security for one country and one economy anywhere in the world is security for the entire region or entire globe. And we saw that with the financial crisis, the Asian financial crisis, and the economic meltdown. Now let me finish by saying that it is important for you to balance that globalization has got advantages and disadvantages, and that the advantages and disadvantages need to be differentiated. And I will leave it up to you to say, on a balance, is it more advantageous or is it less advantageous? I think that is something I would like students to say. Well, the positive effects, and there is material there that has been presented, which presents very much the advantages and disadvantages of globalization. But the advantages is that it has provided free trade across the world, free from physical and political boundaries, which serve to create more time, cost, distortions in doing global trade. But also, it has increased the communication, the pace of communication, the rate of communication. I can now talk to someone in the US for no cost at all, and at any time, including face-to-face. We can now offer our lecture to you by video from wherever you are. You may be traveling from Dar es Salaam. When you get to Dubai, you can watch the second lecture. When you get to Beijing, you can watch the third lecture. And the answer you are, that's globalization. Information communication technology as a whole. It has made it cheaper to move goods around the world. And therefore, services as well as goods are becoming cheaper and a shorter time. But it has also had some negative effects. Negative effects is crime. We now have cyber crime. We now have the spams. Have you ever received those emails, mainly from Nigeria, saying that, you know, give us your bank account. I have been a benefactor of so much amount of money, and if you send some money, I'm going to transmit it to you. Some people have been conned that the United Nations has asking for people to apply, send in a bit of money so that you can get a visa to come for the interview. And of course, a number of financial crimes, that is, but also culture. There's cultural globalization. It's meant that some cultures that are being promoted are harmful. For example, we can say the harm of using illegal drugs. But some people who are getting into this behavior, they are watching and adapting the culture from globalization, from the ease of getting information, for the ease of being able to communicate across the world, and the inability for the national government authorities to limit what is coming in and what is coming out. And as a result, it has had negative effect of culture, but also underdevelopment. And again, we go back to the first lecture where there is one mode of production interacting with another mode of production, the dominant mode of production would tend to underdevelop the weaker mode of production. And since globalization has come, and not all countries are at the same level, therefore, the free flow of investment and goods and services and trade and companies across the globe has meant that in some areas, the companies from one dominant economy have tended to underdevelop companies from a less dominant economies. And we can pick this, for example, across Africa, in Tanzania and Kenya, the used clothes industry. Clothes that have been used in developed countries are being resold in developing countries. The advantage is the people in developing countries can get clothes, good quality clothes, relatively, at a cheaper price. The cost is, it affects the textile industries in those countries. And simply because the textile industries had not reached a point where they could compete in terms of quality with the second-hand, with the clothes from the other developed countries, even though they were second class, but they were of a better quality. And therefore, it's a commonplace. If you go, they will tell you, this is a new bag, this is a used bag. But used bags are normally stronger than the new ones. This is because they are stronger, because they come from a more developed country. But because of globalization, the people, the traders, have made arrangements where they come and they sell them in developed countries, which has a cost attached. This is one of the disadvantages of globalization.